Compression can seem like a really confusing thing. There are so many dials and knobs that you have to deal with, and people are tossing around weird terms like dBs and ratios and thresholds. But don't worry, it's not as complicated as it seems. There are just three things that make up a majority of what you need to understand about compression, and I'm gonna walk you through them right now. So the compressor is usually doing two things at the same time. The first thing that it's doing is managing the louder part. So it's actually squishing down the audio and making it a little less loud than what it was originally. And the second part is actually raising the gain. So it's raising the overall level of the performance up. The goal is really to make sure that the audio has much more even level. So the highs aren't too high and the lows aren't too low. It's bringing the lows up, bringing the highs down. So the first thing that you really need to understand with compression is the actual threshold level. And this is basically just an imaginary line where you're telling the compressor, when anything goes above this imaginary line, I want you to make sure that you kick in and start doing something to manage this volume. And the threshold works directly with the ratio to figure out exactly how much it's going to squish or manage that audio. You can kind of think of the threshold as like bouncers at the doors of a really popular club. So through the night, there's going to be all these surges of people that are trying to come through the door, and the bouncers have to regulate how many people come into the club to make it a good experience for everybody. So the second part that I just mentioned a minute ago is the ratio, and this is how many people the bouncers are gonna let through the door. And this is usually expressed in numbers that say something like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 or 8 to 1 or 20 to 1. You get the idea. The higher the number that is, the more that the audio actually gets compressed. Or to keep going with the nightclub analogy, this is how many people the bouncers are actually going to let through the door. So when the ratio is 3 to 1, that means for every 3 people that are coming to the door of the club, they're only letting 1 through. And if the ratio is 8 to 1, that means for every 8 people that are coming to the door of the club, they're only letting 1 through. So the higher the number, the more it's actually getting compressed, so the less people are actually able to get through. So from an audio perspective, this means that for every 8 dB that goes over that threshold line, only 1 of the dBs is actually going to make it through. So that's when you have a ratio of 8 to 1. And so for 20 to 1, it gets a lot more restrictive, and you get the idea. So the threshold and the ratio are working together to see how much of that audio is going to get squished down and how far it's actually going to squish it. And when I'm recording things like vocals, usually what I'm looking for is to set the threshold down into areas that are peaks, but not to set it necessarily down into the normal performance level. So we covered the ratio and the threshold, which is the first part of the compressor. And now the second part of the compressor that we're going to be talking about, or the third point, is the gain. And this is where we're actually raising up the level of the overall performance to make it a little bit louder. So we're making the quieter parts a little bit louder. So now we're gonna take the entire audio and we're gonna raise that entire volume level up. And the reason that we can do that is we knocked off some of those peaks by compressing them down, so we have more room to raise it up, which will bring up the quieter parts, and it will make the overall performance a little bit louder in the mix. But this is also where it can get a little bit dicey if you haven't prepped your recording well. And this is what I mean by that. A lot of times we're recording in rooms that aren't the most ideal situations. We have computer fans, we have HVAC noise, we have all kinds of other things. Maybe it's Uncle Ivan in the next room snoring. Whatever it is, there's some background noise that makes up what is called the noise floor in your recording. So whatever background noise or noise floor that you have in your recording is going to get brought up when we start to use the gain on the compressor. And all of that background noise will get louder. And this is especially true if you don't record at a very high volume level. So if you're recording just above the noise floor, you're gonna get a lot of noise in your recordings or in your mix as you raise the gain up on your compressor. So this is my suggestion to you. I'm usually aiming to have my audio hitting about midway between where the noise floor is at and where the top of the meter is at. So that way I have a little bit of room above and definitely have some room below. So try that when you're recording audio and see if it maybe helps with some of the room noise issues when you start raising the gain on your compressor. And again, the reason that I'm showing you this is it will give you the ability to raise your gain on your compressor without introducing a lot more noise into the mix that you're putting together. So now that you understand how a compressor works for something like vocals, you're probably trying to figure out also how to EQ your vocals so that they sound good. And if so, you can check out this next video where I will walk you through some of the problem areas and the good parts when you're trying to EQ your vocals for the best performance. And I'll see you in the next round.